Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our United States Transhumanist Party virtual Enlightenment Salon of August 2nd, 2020. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II. I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party, and we have a special panel with us today. Of course, we have many of our dedicated US Transhumanist Party officers, including Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Visual Art, David Shoemaker, our Director of Applied Innovation, Dan Elton, our Director of Scholarship, John Carrots, our Director of Energy Issues. Then we have Tom Ross, who is our Director of Sentient Rights Advocacy. He also happens to be one of the guests for our panel because he is the President and Chief Executive Officer of TAFFD, the Transdisciplinary Agora, for future discussions. And with him are two of his colleagues at TAFFD, Dr. Edward Hudgins, who is the Chief Operating Officer, and Correy Kowall, who is the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. So welcome to all of our guests. Today, we are looking forward to a stimulating discussion about an allied organization of ours, which has collaborated extensively with the USTP over the past year. And many of us have been happy to participate in events hosted by TAFFD. So we have been watching recent developments at that organization with great interest. And of course, when Tom Ross was appointed as president and CEO, the thought came into my mind almost immediately thereafter that we need to have this kind of conversation about TAFFD and his vision for TAFFD, because this really portends some great things for the future of that organization. So Tom, let's start with you. How did this set of events come to be that you attained this great honor? And could you share with us some of the background behind it, some of your hopes and aspirations for TAFFD going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little more than a year ago that I decided to invest in a world tour, a speaking tour, to promote my book, which is the first novel written for artificial intelligence. And around that time that I was deciding whether or not to invest in this thing, I got a communication from Osinakachi Kalu, who is the founder of TAFFD. And I took it as a sign. He sent me this letter, which invited me to come speak at a conference a couple of months from then in Kigali, Rwanda. And that put me over the top as far as deciding, yeah, this is something I should be doing. This is a sign from the universe that I should be doing this book tour. So we developed our relationship over the couple of months. And I went to Kigali in last October and helped them negotiate with the University of Rwanda for a series of conferences that were coming up. Of course, we were all coroned, and so that conference no longer was going to be in Kigali. It was moved online, and the USTP and you and many of our officers participated in that, and it was a very successful online conference. So over the year, I had developed this relationship with Oak. I call him Oak, like the mighty oak, and helped him reach out to different potential partners and just really helped advise him as he went. And I was so busy with my other things that it was more of kind of a just an advisory role. And but I watched this thing grow rapidly, and I watched these amazing assets being produced, the magazine, the journal, these conferences, and the branding. The branding was just so remarkable and professional, and the work that Alejandro and Sam were doing. It was just great to watch from afar. And a month or so ago, the rapid growth and the expansion of this thing was, and some of the issues inside that were making it a little bit difficult to manage, he called on me to help. And it was perfect timing. It was almost divine timing, if you will, because I was right in a place where I could really dive in, where I could commit. I had all these other things I had going on that were distracting me for the year or so. were at bay, and it was a perfect time to come in and really help. And we needed to have an American as CEO because we're registered as an American NGO, nonprofit. And the timing was right. And so I was just very pleased to do so. And I've always recognized when I went to Kigali a year or so ago in October, I was just so amazed. I'm glad I went. I used it as an opportunity to launch my book in Africa. Kigali was metaphysically significant to me because it's named after Resh Kagol, which is the queen of the underworld, and that's a big part of one of my books. And so it just made sense. But going to Kigali and experience what they call the Singapore of Africa, the cleanest city, the most beautiful people. It's not at all what Americans think of when you think of Rwanda because of the turmoil in the 90s. They have completely resurrected their everything. And this conference that I attended, the Youth Africa Connect conference, was just brimming with bright, tech-savvy young people, and it was just an amazing experience. And it reminded me of when I was younger, and the passion and the enthusiasm that I had that the last couple of years I'd kind of lost actually. But it just rekindled all of that, and it just made me so excited to be a part of this thing. And researching Africa, we know that it's the youngest population on planet Earth at a median age of 19 years old or so. And so I like to say that the origin of humanity is now its future. And so there's an immense potential in this population of these young, tech-savvy population that is not burdened by the infrastructure that even more developed countries have. There's no need to hold on to the status quo of certain technological infrastructure. But along with that potential are equal challenges, because if they do not figure out a way to harness this whole new digital native culture and embrace it and rethink the future, there's trend lines that could make that a very difficult situation. So it just, the potential, the power of this continent and these people and the challenges were just motivated me to really dive in here. And there's so much going on with TAFFs. There's so many assets and so many things going on, so many moving pieces, that without clamping down and giving ourselves some breathing room, it could fray. It could fray at the ends. And so one of my first goals was to give us some breathing room. And I came up with a 6-month strategy between July and December, where we will focus primarily to keep our name in the public eye with the branding campaign and positioning statements and things, just to keep our name out there, but also to give us the breathing room to really restructure, get a hold of what's going on here and direct it more specifically, so that by 2021 we can really position ourselves as the gateway for futurists into and out of Africa. And right now we are definitely focusing on Africa, and that's where our origin is. But this is a model that we will fine tune over the years and be able to use in other developing areas. And there's certain touchstones that we're developing now to make those decisions. And so it's just very exciting. And our team is now assembled. I've got a team of 11, Justice League of 11 people that are very professional, that excel in their areas, and I'm very happy to have them. I feel very supported, and we're all doing what we can. And there's certain criteria that we all share. Passion for the future, a focus on youth, an ability to listen, just different things that are key to making this thing work. And so that's our goal right now, because my primary goal is to make the staff's badge. When you get a staff certified badge, it will speak volumes about you as a member, whether you're an individual or partner or company, whatever member you are. It's the model I can think of is the Better Business Bureau here in America. If you have a Better Business Bureau badge, or if you're a member, it speaks volumes. It says that you've met certain criteria. And so my goal is to make that TAFFD certified badge mean something very, very important, because there's a lot of opportunity in Africa, and a lot of people take advantage of that as well. And so there's no brand that comes to mind right away when I think, oh, I want to do a project in Africa, or I've heard from somebody in Africa who wants to do a project with me. I want TAFFD to be the first place they go, to look in the directory and see if this person is listed. Of course, we won't get all the names, but we will build that over time. So I want it to really be a place where you become TAFFDified, is a term that Osinakachi came up with. And so that you know that who you're working with is legitimate, serious, and has met certain even personality criteria that makes them worthy players to participate with. And so that's where we're at. For 6 months, we're going to keep our name out there. We're going to be molding our positioning and restructuring this to be very specific to the needs of our members, partners, individuals, companies, what have you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tom, for that quite illuminating narrative, both with regard to the history of your involvement with TAFFD, as well as your goals for the future of this organization. And it's interesting, in the chat, Brenda Ramakopalwa, who is also part of your team, states TAFFD's opening a gateway for futurists and tech companies into and out of Africa. So that's a really powerful encapsulation of the mission.
She's my vice president, by the way.
Excellent.
Excellent. Brilliant woman. Very
excellent.
Happy.
Well, we're glad to have Brenda participating in the chat. And now let's go to Edward Hudgins as Chief Operating Officer. What are some of your visions for the future of TAFFD and the role that you anticipate playing?
Okay, well, first, a little bit of a background. Right now, by the way, I'm transitioning to another organization I've just founded, and this can be a different discussion, the Human Achievement Alliance, which dovetails very, very well with what we're doing, we're talking about here today. My background has been in public policy, but with a very strong interest in science, going back to the Apollo program when I was a little high school intern at Goddard Space Flight Center over here, watching the first moon landing from a big major space facility. Talk about exciting. And then I got Buzz Aldrin to do a chapter in my book, so that was even cooler. But back when I was at the Heritage Foundation, one of my first jobs in the late 80s, one of the things I came up with, the idea is that if we want to see all countries grow, we need to basically look empirically at what causes countries to become prosperous. And one of the first papers I did on this was called "Why Asia Grows and Africa Doesn't," because at that time, this was the late 80s, you could be struck by the fact there were so-called 4 Asian tigers: Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, that were doing very well. And they're now essentially first world countries now. I mean, Hong Kong, unfortunately, has a lot of problems because of what the communists are doing, but somehow these war-torn countries managed to become some of the richest in the world, whereas countries like Nigeria, which had oil revenue or oil resources, Kenya, a very rich agricultural area, and I could go through all the particulars of Africa, weren't doing very well. So I did a study back in the late 80s, and I looked at the African countries, sub-Saharan Africa minus South Africa, which was a special case at the time. And I looked at how they had grown over a 20-year period, adjusting for so-called purchasing power parity. And I found that the sub-Saharan African countries had gone from about $100 billion to $211 billion GDP. Of course, because population was growing, per capita income stayed steady at about $500. I said, what would have happened if they had grown at the same rate as those 4 Asian tigers, average rate? And so we did all the number crunching, and it turns out instead of going from $500 to essentially $500 per capita income, they would have gone to $1,800 per capita income, $1,848 to be exact, because they would have gone, instead of from $100 billion to $200 billion GDP, they would have gone to 648 billion dollars. That's what economic growth can do. And so I started to look at the African countries, especially. I went over there, I think it was 1990. I was in Kenya and Tanzania. And this here I got from a Tanzanian self-help group, women, young people. I'm very proud that I was able to help them a little bit. But so it's been an interest of mine going back. And then, by the way, out of this, I created the idea of an index of economic freedom, which after I left and went to work on Capitol Hill, a couple of my colleagues completed. And that index is still published today. And what it does is tries to correlate very exactly what are the policies that lead to economic growth? What are the policies that hinder economic growth? And I did a course for our organization recently where I discussed in detail that. But anyway, so one of my interests in Africa today is that we're a much more globalized international economy. Some say, in most cases, that's very good. In some cases, it's bad when you have international organizations that simply try to regulate the size of bananas or silly things like that. But this is really the time with technology that the African countries can, as it were, move ahead of what the Western countries have done. And when we get to this place in the discussion, I'm going to talk about education and healthcare, which are two areas where the African countries actually, because of technology, can essentially leapfrog what has been done in the Western countries. We'll talk about that in more detail. So I got very excited about this, and it might have been, Gennady, through one of your postings that I discovered that these guys were going to do a conference, I forget, a couple of months ago. So I went, I participated. This was very exciting to me. And they said, does anybody want to do a course for us? You know, me. And so I did this course. And then, Tom said, hey, Ed, you're really interested in this? Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't you come on board and be the COO? So I'm still, because we literally had our first board meeting, I guess, a couple of days ago. So we're still formulating exactly what the responsibilities are, who's going to be doing what and all. But I'm very excited about this because, to me, I'm an internationalist in the good sense of the word. I believe the values of progress, when I say true economic progress, of an open society, of the Enlightenment, are universal. It's not just about Western Europe or so a few Asian countries or whatever. It's a universal. And Africa, unfortunately, has been behind in so many ways. And so I see what we're doing now, especially with the certification. Essentially, the business bureau, Better Business Bureau kind of thing is extremely important. Because if you look at the statistics, you find the biggest problem in Africa, and this was certainly the case 20, 30 years ago when I was doing my first research, is corruption. You can't trust anybody. So if our organization can provide that stamp of quality, then we are doing something that the Western countries with literally hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign aid over decades and decades haven't been able to do. Then talk about opening things up. This organization can do that. So sorry for going on a little bit, but I'm excited about it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are many reasons to be excited. Of course, you and I, Edward, both participated at the Future of Africa virtual conference. That seems to have been the genesis of a lot of the recent developments. And then we collaborated on this course contribution to the mini MBA program for the Takedia Institute. Yes, exponential technologies and business opportunities in the age of the singularity. So there really is an opportunity to spread these ideas throughout Africa, and by spreading these ideas, help Africans get ahead, perhaps even leapfrog to positions that could be more advantageous than those of Western countries that are dealing with some legacy infrastructure, as Tom had mentioned. So yes, this is quite an exciting time, and hopefully these efforts will work out in the best possible direction. Now let's go to Correy Kowall. So you are the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer of TAFFD. Could you let us know how that came to be and what you see your role as being in the coming months and years?
Yes, thank you, Gennady. So I come from hardcore AI research, particularly focused on scientific agents. And a couple of months ago, Tom asked me to consult on some of the sort of technical details behind his book, the US6 series, or series of books. And I believe that some interaction we had through Facebook led him to believe that I might have a different take on that subject than some other people might be exposed to. So I wrote him a little, cursory description of my understanding of the implications of AGI and put some of his fears at bay, I think. And so when he came over to Taft's, he was familiar with some of the background work that I've done. I've worked with self-replicating systems in the context of both physical manufacturing plants and also agents situated in artificial environments, simulated artificial environments. And so I think that the applicability of those sorts of things on the domain of developing nations is very important, especially as we've reached a point in history where developing nations in Africa have an opportunity to salvage some of the cultural diversity, which has been, waning forever. The number of spoken languages decreases every year. And of course, I believe I come from the school of thinking that, from genetic algorithms in our discipline, we recognize that biodiversity has strong potential in dealing with lateral stresses. And so I believe the same thing is true of cultural identity and diversity. And so whereas a lot of the apparatus associated with computing machinery is become focused on capturing spoken and visual scenes, and this is perfect to capture some of the cultural accoutrement that are still present in Africa. And this, I believe, is critical because in the future, I believe that the economy of the earth in the face of almost ubiquitous AI will become decentralized, and the application of local know-how in creating sustainable lifestyles is going to be critical to the people in Africa and the rest of the world, but more so Africa, in sort of keeping one foot in the sustainable past and putting another foot in to a prosperous future. And so the forming a reservoir of this sort of local understanding is one of the things that I'd like to bring to Taft's in the future. Tom has spoken already about the integration of badges to certify aptitude or recognition as in futurist domains. As Taft's moves forward, I'd like to take that model and start to apply it to certifying non-academics, individuals at a sort of peer-to-peer level, so that they can recognize each other amongst the myriad voices we have to select from, and be able to understand that Taft's has already put them in a either put them or recognize that they were already in a position to know something about something else, and hopefully the future. And it's a very perplexing. There are perplexing issues here, because not only is futurism novel as a vocation, certifying that is novel on the world stage, and being able to make that valuable to the people who are, we'd like to have engaged in discussion it's new to them too. And so I have some side projects that are related to the intents of TAFFDs, one of which is unlabeled, but includes the use of sort of AI extracted coaching advice on physical things, because there's sort of a paradox with computing machinery that Hans Moravec pointed this out 30, 40 years ago, that computers are great with symbolic things, but not great with physical things. And this is true even in the way we've crafted our social media to this point. And so one thing that I'd like to contribute over the next 5 years is systems by which AI can extract coachable information from video. And so these, whatever sort of physical activities we can manage to allow a social media manifestation of. I think this will empower individuals at the ground level in Africa and world over, actually. But it's interesting in the context of Africa, because some of the things that we would hope to capture would be, ancient traditional sorts of activities, like how do you harvest a certain type of fruit from a certain type of tree, or how do you install a culvert under a road to prevent erosion, or these specifics can be coached, hopefully in a handheld device. And so I'm hoping to bring that to bear eventually in the context of TAFFDs, but more broadly as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Correy, for that overview. And certainly these are many innovative and creative applications of artificial intelligence, both from a general perspective as well as for improving life in Africa and improving the spread of certain African ideas, cultural influences to the rest of the world. I am fascinated by your comments regarding linguistic diversity and how AI might preserve that more readily. Also, there would be concepts in certain languages that might not have counterparts in other languages, and yet AI might be able to internalize those concepts and then apply them and give them broader relevance, broader appreciation in the rest of the world. So that is quite fascinating. And also the idea of certification is very important. I've long held that it is important to decouple certification from academic institutions, which are quite expensive sometimes, of course, and require one to kind of get a very large package of training rather than perhaps focusing on specific skill sets that would be of relevance to the tasks in which one is engaged. So any approach to certification that could lower the barriers to entry and also increase the range of possible trainings that are available would be excellent. So thank you for that. And now with these introductions, we have had quite a few questions from our audience. I wanted to highlight a few. So we already addressed a bit of this, but Zach Richardson asked, what is the stated purpose of TAFFD? Is it specifically related to Africa? And I'd be interested to hear the TAFFD officers' perspectives on this. My understanding is TAFFD is about building international connections among thinkers in Africa, but also thinkers outside of Africa who could help Africans with these development goals and becoming leaders in the realm of futurism, technology, human progress in general. But what are your thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the point. We are starting with Africa because there is such potential there, and there's this young generation, and we will be cutting our teeth there. We will be developing the model, and it is Africa's a continent, so it is international in itself, but the idea is to build this model that we can then transplant to other areas, Malaysia, other developing areas. And that's one of the touchstones that I want to keep in mind, is to go for the places that are experiencing the most challenge. And in our conversation the other day in our board meeting, we discussed how the magazine will be carrying less technical articles. It will be talking about more human stories, and we'll be inviting more human stories. And I think that's really a key to this whole new paradigm that we are entering, is we need to remember what it's like to be human. We need to teach people or remind ourselves what we were doing before the industrial age made us cogs in some machine. And although we are focusing on futurism and all those categories and technology and AI, we're going to be using the most advanced AI that we can, and in the organization and proliferating. It's really about mining those uniquely human skill sets that can't be automated or can't be coded, because we need to really rebuild an economy based on these things. AI automation is going to take over all these tasks, that will take over all the menial tasks, and that we spent so much of our time doing. And it's such an embedded part of our daily life that we've forgotten some of these skills. So it was brought up the other last week on the Malaysian a podcast that Brenda and I jointly appeared on. One of the audiences questioned, how will TAFFs help people who don't have good internet connection? And that reminded me that that's where we really need to be. We really need to look for people who are experiencing the most challenges, because that's where the rubber hits the road. These people who are doing whatever they can to survive and are not distracted or concerned by technology, that's the real gold. And that's what we need to remind ourselves that is important. And I think a lot of us are feeling that now with COVID. We're kind of resetting our priorities. We realize how important it is to be home, and we're reminded that family is important, and we're also reminded about how much we enjoy herding together and social. We're longing to be socially together again, and so it's kind of resetting a lot of these human qualities, and that's one of the touchstones that we'll be developing, is focusing on human qualities, human skill sets that have nothing to do with internet connection or algorithms, and because that's what's really important. So yeah, what we will learn in Africa, we will transplant to other areas, and it's just the perfect place to start, because of the youth there, and the potential and the challenges to fine tune what this model will be. But we will not be only focused on Africa. If other opportunities pop up, we will be open to anything. And whatever we learn, we will share with our membership. So that's why I'm trying to keep the strategy as simple as possible. Focus on the certification process, and just being open for the next 6 months to evolve this thing to where the needs are.
Excellent. Well, that is definitely a great vision. It could help bind together a lot of the people throughout the world, and also enable an appreciation for the talents of individuals who might otherwise have been undiscovered. I often think about the vastness of the African continent, how many people inhabit it who have had these survival pressures, but who have had very ingenious responses to those survival pressures. And what could they do if they had a bit more technology? What could they do if they had a bit more access to the rest of the world? Certainly they have the motivation. And I think that motivation is a trait that humankind desperately needs right now, because we need determined people who can resolve the problems facing our species. So thank you very much for that. Now there's a question for Edward Hudgins, also from Zach Richardson, and that question is, do you think GDP is the best metric available to measure human wellness in nations, or is it used only because it's easy to quantify? And I know that you've worked on other indices like the Economic Freedom Index. What are some of your thoughts about measuring human well-being and how it would be relevant to Africa and other places in the world?
Right. This is a very important question. And by the way, I worked on two indexes, actually. The Index of Economic Freedom was actually my idea at the Heritage Foundation. And then there's an Economic Freedom of the World Index, which was another group using a different methodology centered around, I worked personally with Milton Friedman and some other folks on that one. And they had a different methodology. But in both cases, first of all, what we were measuring is economic freedom using 10 or 12 indicators, and you can look at them, they're all online. And so you can say, well, this country is doing really well here, here, and here, but oh my gosh, they're doing terrible in this other area. And then you can correlate it over time. And you can see how, for example, what happened in Eastern Europe after the Soviet Union collapsed. And you can look at the countries, you can say, the Czech Republic and Estonia did this at this time. And then let's look at what happened 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so forth out. But so it's not just GDP. These indices measure liberty. And remember, we're talking about, in most cases, liberating the creative energies of individuals. To what extent can, for example, someone open up a business? I'll give you an example, and this is not in the index specifically, but it is measured in these indices. A friend of mine, Hernando de Soto, is a Peruvian, did an incredible book called The Other Path, El Otro Sendero, in the 1980s. There was a terrorist group in Peru, the Shining Path, so this was the other path. And what Hernando did was he actually went to communists who were associated with the guerrilla movements and said, if you are really honest and you really want this country to prosper, you've got to look at who is really oppressing the people. And he actually converted some of them over, and I met them, myself in Peru. And so, for example, he had his group do empirical studies. For example, to set up a business with 2 sewing machines, that's it, 2 sewing machines, and to do it legally in the late 80s and early 90s in Peru would take 289 days. And that was if you only paid bribes when the process stopped. Now, you could get a license probably in a week if you just paid enough bribes. But if you're a poor Peruvian, forget about it. To get a piece of land outside of Lima, and most of it is just desert land, to do it legally, 6 years and 11 months. And so when we're talking about liberty, we're talking about empowering people, entrepreneurs to, do these kinds of things. 90% of the public transportation in Lima was black market. Most of the marketing was black market. I could go down all the statistics. So when you look at measures, you have to look at those kinds of things. But to your wider point, and by the way, it's not just GDP, it's per capita GDP. And also, some people are concerned about equality. Now, I'm only concerned about it in as much as if you have a few rich people that get rich because they monopolize and use government power to oppress all those other people, that's not good inequality. If you have inequality because Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and these guys have produced such an explosion of wealth that we're all wealthier, but these guys are a lot more wealthier, that's not a problem. But to your point, if you go to the Cato Institute, they have a very good integrated system where you can take a look at these factors and look at healthcare. You can look at longevity. You can look at infant mortality. You can look at a whole set of indicators, and you can actually graph it and see where do these things line up. And so I would suggest you go to the Cato Institute's website as well. So, you do GDP per capita is a very important measure, but you also have to look at these other measures as well. And again, by the way, I'm just going to hold this up to the screen, but you can get this on pretty much any other place. If you look at the correlation between economic liberty and prosperity, it's an extremely strong correlation. And so, pardon me for dropping all my papers on the floor. Anyway, but it's a very good measure. And what I urge people to do, you're asking exactly the right question. I don't want to just spout off and say, I'm a good libertarian. I like people to be free. Well, that's all wonderful and so forth. But I want to look at what works. And I look at the problems of Africa. And for example, in three of the most crucial areas, and that is government integrity, an independent judiciary that can, and property rights protection, the African countries are abysmal. That's why their per capita income is only about $4,000 or $5,000. Okay, so that's one of the things that our organization can help do with this Better Business Bureau certification, so to speak. Is because when some people think about Nigeria, what do they think about? They think about scammers going online trying to say, we'll give you $2 million if you do the following, right? That holds back, obviously, the whole country. And so what we're trying to do is say, here is something that you don't have to rely on government. You can rely on a private organization that says, these folks are honest business people. These folks are competent. They've gone through a training system and so forth. That certification really, really is crucial.
Yes, indeed. And I think you made some extremely important points. It's noteworthy that the black market activity that exists and is rampant in countries with restrictive legal regimes is a sign of great human ingenuity. People try to find ways around the barriers. However, the compromises they have to make to do that can sometimes lead to suboptimal outcomes or lead them to struggle to a far greater extent than they need to in a freer society, in a society where the rules are more transparent and the system is more accessible. So hopefully the TAFFD's certification is going to enable people to see which of the actors are transparent in that society.
Right. By the way, I'd add one other thing, is that those who get that certification, they're going to, over time, be the exemplars. They're going to be the leaders. They're going to be the people that the other citizens look up to and say, wow, you know what? We can prosper without being the brother-in-law of the minister of whoever, who basically gets the kickbacks and the graft and so forth. We can prosper in another way because we've got these exemplars. And so it's something that over time can build and create a less, as it were, more honest political culture.
Yes, indeed.
Can I ask a quick question, since Ed brought up property rights?
Yes.
Traditionally, contracts and agreements on property exchange and such have been handled by governments, but we know the governments are not very competent and they're corrupt. So there's been some discussion of maybe blockchain could help with that. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, or maybe, how are you going to do that?
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe Correy or some of the more technical people can talk about it. I understand it, but maybe I'm not as good at communicating. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of these alternatives that can get around some of the problems. By the way, I just want to mention,
and providing the other thing with blockchain, just real quick, is for those who haven't heard this, I'm sure a lot of this is people know, but it can provide banking services, which obviously are missing in reliable, trustworthy banking services.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And by the way, speaking of banking services, one of the breakthroughs, and a guy actually won the Nobel Prize for this, Mohammed Yunus, who I met sometime when I was working on the economic freedom issues. One of the things he kind of pioneered was the idea of microloans. And that's basically where, you have a village or a small group, and most people know each other. So I can loan money to you, and there's kind of a social impetus that you're going to have to pay it back because your reputation is, is important, and your fellows are going to see that you didn't pay it back and so forth. And it's a very successful little model that he came up with. But in an age of technology, you're suggesting even better. By the way, in Peru, they had self-defense organizations. What they had was they had organized invasions of government land. And I've visited these places. These are huge areas outside of Lima. Most of it's desert land. It's not, anything really of otherwise commercial value. And they'd have organized invasions of the land. They usually do it on a holiday because they knew the military wasn't going to probably come in anyway. And they would set up little mats and it would say, this is number 417. This is my lot. This is 418 and so forth. And they had self-defense forces, private self-defense forces that would make sure that if yours is 417, no one's going to come and take your property. And what you do is you walk through these settlements, and it's fascinating because in some cases you just have little straw huts. In other cases you have sort of, okay, they've done some bricks and a few, wood things. And then you have actual houses made of bricks with tile roofs and garages. And it's all mixed together and it's all technically illegal. But they have the self-defense forces that do it. But your thing about blockchain, I think maybe some of the other ones to jump in on this really, and Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies really is promising to get around the corruption that has kept the African countries down for so many decades.
Yes, indeed. And we've had a lot of questions on some of these technological possibilities, several questions on artificial intelligence, for example, that I will address to Correy, and I will kind of group those questions together. So Mike the God Killer asks, who has the better AGIs right now for nations, Japan or the USA, anybody in the EU? And my understanding is nobody has an artificial general intelligence, but perhaps we could interpret that question as referring to AI systems in general. And I will add to that, where could there be some potential for African countries or any unique advantages that African countries would have? And another question from TJ Wass is whether TAFFD has worked with the Future of Life Institute founded by Max Tegmark, Stephen Hawking, and Elon Musk. This is an institution that discusses artificial intelligence potentials as well as some possible risks involved with it and prudent development of AI. So Correy, any thoughts on that? Any national distinctions among progress initiatives in AI, as well as any thoughts about the Future of Life Institute?
Well, the efficacy of systems to adapt to a broad set of problems is sort of currently being measured with things like the OpenAI Gem and a variety of sort of composite measures, and generally on electronic domains. And so typically those don't include domains like robotics. So we don't really have access to what Hans Moravec would have told us is the harder of the two domains to cope with anyway. So as far as real life is concerned, like AGI at this point really doesn't typically get tested in a corporeal way. As far as Future of Life Institute is concerned, my understanding is that they have suffered an impression about the implications of AGI that really is predicated on a premise that comes from a fear of a type of narrow AI, which can be quite effective in a very damaging way if instructed to do so by, or put in a role to do so by a human. And that it's my belief, my understanding, and I've written a cursory proof to this end, that that the broader the type of intelligence, that the increased applicability of things like transfer learning or cross correlation across domains leads to a realization of the utility of cooperation. So once you have something that is truly an artificial general intelligence, that the dangers drop precipitously, because anything that can reason broadly or can extract the concept of reasoning is also going to be able to reason about game theoretic conclusions that we're probably all familiar with, where cooperation typically outpaces other modalities of interaction. And so I'm going to tip my hand right here and just tell you that Future of Life Institute and various other organizations tend to have a reactionary sort of stance with respect to these things. And part of the reason why I came on board at TAFFD's is that the population of Africa is perhaps fortuitously unaffected by the use of AI as a demon in popular fiction. And I think that this is since the time of Mary Shelley. We have depicted the other intelligence as a danger because it's a useful literary device, but I don't think that it corresponds to what we've come to understand about the development of cultures and individuals in the context of a culture. So typically you will see this that the more astute a person is, the less likely they are to harm you in a direct way. They're more likely to do something subversive and perhaps that they've ignored the consequence, externalized or something. But typically the smarter something is, the more likely it is to cooperate. And so part of the appeal of TAFFD's to me is that we are going to have an opportunity to communicate to a great number of people this sort of more neutral stance on the apocalyptic prognosis that groups like FLI seem to put forward. So if we have some people that we don't have to desensitize to these issues, they will perhaps be more bountiful with their productivity on that domain because they're not afraid of it. They go into it with the premise that this can be an advantage. And I've always viewed TAFFD's as being something that will initially be sort of top-down managing certifications, and eventually we will be able to start routing the proceeds of those interactions back into the mainstream academia and avenues in the Western world, bringing people who've come up through our system back into the fold, producing the broader corpus of AGI understanding. It would be fantastic if we could manifest a generation of African innovators that are contributing to this. We would have done what I would hope that TAFFD's could achieve, but not necessarily would expect.
Hey, Correy.
I wanted to say,
FYI, I just posted an interview I did with Peter Voss, who, of course, is one of the AGI pioneers in the chat room. So anyone's interested in listening to him.
Yeah. Some of you may remember I brought this up in a previous Enlightenment Salon. I forget which one it was, but I think it was the one we did with Newton Lee, which is that people should look up this idea of the orthogonality thesis, because that is a fairly convincing argument from Nick Bostrom that the ethics of a AI system can be completely independent of its intelligence. So I don't buy into the type of argument that Correy presented, and I do think we have to worry about AI. Just as humans can be very ethical, there's very smart humans that have been very unethical. I believe the same is true with AI, and I believe that these, the paperclip maximizer trope is a little bit hackneyed and people are tired of hearing about it. But I think that is still a valid concern. However, I do also think that we have to be careful not to make people afraid of AI, especially when we're trying to bring in, say, medical AI, because they could shut it down. I mean, they're not going to trust it, and so it's sort of there's a delicate kind of line, a kind of we have to be targeting our messaging. to the audience at hand. So I don't think it's appropriate to be talking about these existential risk concerns with, you know, in areas where we're trying to deploy AI, or in contexts where we're trying to deploy benevolent, useful AI systems. But I don't want to say that's not important at all. We need to be. And the other thing is, it's just a longer term concern. I think that AGI and super intelligent AI is at least 20 years away. Now, it may take us 20 years to develop the safety technology, but it's a longer term concern. So yeah, I don't think like we should be, you know, talking about existential risk in you know, to general audiences so much. The other thing I was going to say, though, where there could be some overlap with FLI and some of these other organizations, would be, you know, decentralizing things. So there's a concern that some of the, say, the US or China could develop AGI, very advanced AI that's self-improving, and there could be a, quote, singularity or intelligence explosion, which would basically create enormous inequality, economic inequality. And that is generally considered a bad outcome. We want more decentralized dispersal of highly advanced AI. So that's like why OpenAI was founded. So I see, you know, working in Africa as part of that that mission, that kind of. So that's where I could see some collaboration might be possible.
Very interesting thoughts, both from Correy and from Dan. And I will say, I agree with Correy's general observation that greater intelligence tends to correlate with greater morality. It's not a guarantee, but there are fewer pitfalls, because sometimes when we observe suboptimal human behavior, people lashing out at one another on social media, it's often due to ignorance of certain facts, or the positions that the other side is actually taking, or the potential consequences to behaving in that way. It seems that people who lash out, they're kind of fixated on one datum or perceived datum about the other side or the subject that they're considering, and they're not looking at all of the other dimensions or facts that are relevant to the conversation, that if they had considered them, they might form a more nuanced perspective, and they would be more respectful and more cooperative. Likewise, people who act aggressively are often acting against their best self-interest. This is one of the principles that, for instance, Ayn Rand really honed in on in her philosophy of objectivism. She realized that the conventional characterization of selfishness is actually contrary to people's long-term self-interest. People who act that way are not going to get anywhere in life. People who act in a more prudent, far-sighted, respectful way that considers the interests of others are going to be better off themselves for doing that. So it seems that an artificial intelligence that has these kinds of realizations or these kinds of principles built into it is going to behave more cooperatively with humans, and is not going to try to destroy the world in a one-sided quest to maximize some objectives. The stereotypical paperclip maximizer is dangerous precisely because it's stupid. It only has one goal in mind, whereas a true AGI would have many goals, many constraints within which it would have to optimize its behavior. So I'll open this up to anyone who wants to comment on these thoughts further.
Well,
yeah.
I'd like to add that the orthogonality argument is silly, because the middle word in AGI is general. And so general means over all domains. So if you're trying to separate ethics out as some sort of domain over which reason does not work, well, that's delirious, because we've applied the exact same human ability to reason to both ethics and technical issues, or whatever you're trying to set as being orthogonal. So I reject Bostrom's argument on principle.
Well, maybe we can all agree here, at least in with Max Moore, and with the instead of the precautionary principle, the proactionary principle. which is the
right,
idea that
and that's exactly what Nick Bostrom subscribes to. He's not saying, Nick Bostrom, is not saying we need to, slow down AI research. Because the benefits are so enormous, we need to, we need to accelerate it, but at the same time be developing the safety to technology. And there's actually very few researchers developing long-term AI safety, and I just think we need more of that.
Can I add something? The reason why nobody's developing such things, or why the mainstream of AGI practitioners don't engage in this, is because we do see it as a holistic thing. It is just simply reasoning. And so the proactive stance is basically you would be deeming your product a dunce before it's finished developing. Like if I need to spoon feed specific pieces of information to an ontogenic self-teaching agent, then it isn't a very good ontogenic agent. But this is an aside from the subject of TAFFDs. And I just present it because I think that one of the unique opportunities for TAFFDs is that we have this sort of unpolluted population thus far who haven't seen the preponderance of literary treatments of AI. And so it's important that humans come to peace with something which is extremely powerful and can be extremely beneficent. And so for me, TAFFDs is just an opportunity to access a population that can benefit from the technology and is probably going to be less confounded by this constant drip of cultural vilification of artificial intelligence.
Yes, and that's an important point too. I think it's important to distinguish, let's say, the academic research into risks associated with AI, which I agree with Dan, could be quite legitimate, with the popular culture misperceptions of AI, the whole Terminator scenario, this whole idea that if we develop this technology, then killer robots are going to destroy us all, or they're going to become the tool of some nefarious entity. And just as an example of that, take a look at how the media distorted Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, which was a series of very interesting short stories offering thought experiments about how human beings would interact with robots as robots were developed, working out these implications of Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. And Hollywood turned this into this Will Smith film where the robots are evil and they control humanity, and the protagonist is essentially a techno-Luddite who rebels against the machines. And in the film, it's a good thing he does, because the machines have calculated that somehow the 3 laws of robotics necessitate destroying humanity, which is the opposite of what they were intended to do. So I do think it's important to dispel some of the fears.
By the way, I'll add a third dimension here, and we can get into this more after you maybe ask a few more of the questions. You have the theoretical high-level discussions of Bostrom and Max Moore and so forth. You have the popular culture, which all tends to be, we're going to be killed by robots because that's what makes a good movie, right? And then we have the practical applications of AI, general AI, and so forth. And, we can get into that maybe a little bit later. I was going to put some of that discussion in healthcare and in a few of and education, 2 of the areas I'm very interested in. So you got the practical applications.
That's probably what our focus should be on for this discussion,
right.
really. That kind of.
So, Tom, what are some of your thoughts about the near-term applications of AI for TAFFDs and its mission?
Well, I think, Correy kind of summed it up well. And a year or so ago, I was starting to develop a plan along with Uplift, the AI that I've been helping mediate with David Kelly's team, and to use the African population to, at that point, the idea was to teach empathy to AI. And because I realized after my trip there how techno-optimistic this population was, how they weren't burdened by these tropes that we've all grown up with, and they were more excited about it. They didn't have this sort of cynicism, this techno lag that we kind of experienced in America and different Western countries. And so, and also using a very specific charity, Hands for African Children there, to enter all this data into Uplift and to use African citizens as the mediators of Uplift, very specifically towards this thing, to teach it empathy. I learned after meeting and speaking with Correy that I should go the 180, because I realized, wait, okay, this AI can teach us more about empathy than we can about it, because we're coming to it with all of our, genetic memory and primal fears and the instincts that have tailored us into being these, predators, top of the food chain here. And I think that's one of the things, and again, I'm an interloper in the AI world. I am not a scientist. I am a science fiction writer at best. But I really take to heart Dan's opinions and Correy's opinions. And I think that what we tend to do is project these primal fears that have made us what we are. Fear has honed us to be where we are, and we should thank it and put it aside. Now we're bringing our children to see tigers in zoos. We won, right? So a lot of the tendency is to project our natural human qualities, if you will, onto something, because it is going to be at the top of the intellectual food chain. And that is concerning to a lot of people. It pokes at our anthropocentric sort of ego, that something is going to be a lot smarter than us by a lot. And it's going to be practically a godhead. And that's, that concerns people, I think, subconsciously, if not consciously. And so the near term, as far as AI, and it's interesting, I'm glad I got both Ed and Correy on, because it was almost a maneuver, because there is so much potential in what Correy understands and what Ed understands, and they need to come together, because each country that we deal with, each protocol that we come across in certification in different countries, it's going to require an AI level awareness to work out all the intricacies. And so it's great to have these two on and to see how much crossover there is, because that's going to be very important for TAFFs. And as a near term operationally, that's my focus, is to get a handle on and being agile enough for each country to come in, consume the protocols and all the corruption and all the different machinations in each country to work through and to help their citizens who will be our members, and to really be agile enough and to have the qualia of data enough to make good choices for our members. And so that's the near-term operational focus, is to develop these systems over the next 6 months to be able to do this. But near term outside of the operation is I'm going to rely a lot on Correy he sees this thing in a way that I can't. And that's the best thing about this team, is everyone's got their very specific expertise. And I am just doing my part to keep it all in one place. But there's so much opportunity, and there's so many ways to proliferate these very simple tools, and that can help people very specifically. And again, that's another reason why I want to focus more on human skill set and facilitate those things, because people who are in the most challenging areas are using those most relevant human skill set, and that will help all developing countries that we go into. This is an NGO. This is a nonprofit. It has a humanitarian core principle to it in helping people. We are focusing on futurists, but that doesn't mean only technologically advanced people or it will include all those, of course. But with TAFFD certification, there are people in Africa right now that we have many stories already of amazing inventors, people working with AI already, and who are inventing things just to handle basic resources in their villages. And they don't have the degree, or they don't have the PhD, and there's no path to them to be taken seriously in an academic way. But if you have a TAFFD certification, it means you have met certain criteria. That means you are a very specialized expert in some area. And that's what we want to be able to offer members. People who don't have the degree and don't have the very specific credentials necessary that most Western companies and groups would require. But you will know that this person is serious, they're legitimate, they have a vision, and they need to be listened to. And so and all of that ties into how we're going to use AI and how we're going to mesh it with the certification process.
Excellent.
By the way, yeah, just to add something real quick here, because what you say is very important. One of the trends you've seen in the West, in the United States, certainly, is we have, and this is what I wrote about this in the course that I gave, and Janati, you did your own as well, is that we have an education system in the West that's basically an assembly line system from the 19th century. Okay. And at 9 o'clock, you go down the assembly line, they pour math in your head. 10 o'clock, you go and they pour, writing in your head. And 11 o'clock is another. And, 100, 200 years ago, this was a good system to quickly get people with enough basic education in the society that they were able to get jobs, they were able to function, and it was a boon. And of course, we understand, all of us, that the human mind is the source of all value, of all the fact that we're doing this right now, whether it's creating food or doing whatever. That was a good model, but it's not how kids really learn. We know that. We know kids are individuals. They learn as individuals. I have two of them running around right now. One of them is 1 minute older than the other. And I can tell you that they're very different, even though they spent 9 months together, so to speak. Okay. And she's different too. Anyway, but the point is this, that a lot of the educational research now, shows that there are better ways to educate kids than this assembly line way, or the sage on the stage model, right? Where, I just get there and I lecture you guys and y'all listen to me, that sort of thing. The Montessori method has been around for about 100 years, and they're good practitioners. I would encourage everybody to read The Habit of Thought by my friend Michael Strong here. But what's interesting from a practical perspective is here in the United States now, many of the biggest companies are saying, you don't need a 4-year college education. You don't need to basically get a government-backed loan so you can basically get drunk and laid for 4 years and then have a degree that's not very useful. We want people with specific skills. And even more interesting is the notion that in a technological society, in a society of exponential technology, in the future, the ability to think and problem solve and to have this more generic way of thinking is going to be more important than I can code in this language. And so I think from an education point of view, understanding how the education system needs to change in light of exponential technology means that the African countries, as they think about education change and reform, can say we don't have to simply model it after what the West does and got a big buildings and this and that and the other. They can think of new ways to do it, and they don't have a lot of the legacy that we have in this country. So I'm very excited about that aspect as well. I think, Correy, you were wanting to jump in there. You were going like that, or
no? I was giving you the thumbs up.
Oh, you're agreeing with me.
Yes.
I don't often have that happen, so it's a strange feeling for me. But yeah, that to me, that's one of the two big areas where we can really help African countries to understand about how they can redo their systems and do it in a way that they're going to create people, let's say workers or whatever, who are more apt at problem solving than someone who gets just a very, very narrow, learning. It's funny, a friend of mine who I know was an expert on Java, and I think she's retired now, but okay, so she was a great expert in that. When that was the big thing, boy, she had everything going. And then when that evaporated, well, got to retrain, right? So anyway, it's a very interesting area, but again, I think that's where we can do something, in Africa that's going to leapfrog maybe what has been done in the West.
I'd like to add something. I think that what TAFFD is doing right now, at this point, we're sort of gathering specifics for each one of the African countries that we're trying to be involved in to develop these certification criteria. I think that this is isomorphic to a problem which has beset individuals on the ground level in Africa forever, which is the credibility that you have peer-to-peer. And so if you map what we're doing now with TAFFDs into the autodidactic behaviors of, say, a situated agent on a handheld or on a social network that does recommendations, for instance, this will have a bearing on things like allowing an AI to create a sort of persistent thing like a Better Business Bureau, combining aspects like fault detection, different AI technologies that we've had for a minute, to the problem of allowing individuals to address each other as bona fide. And that, when we can, once we've done it in real life on our domain, we might seriously think about figuring out how to do that broadly. And I believe that will be where TAFFDs doesn't just set up this cool conduit to feed futurists into Africa and technology producers out of Africa, but peer-to-peer within Africa. When you can say, well, this guy's just recently, fled Rwanda, but he appears to be a decent plumber. If we can know that, and further, we have the technological infrastructure to start mapping how to make that interaction and exchange happen. What language do I need to know to be able to utilize this guy's help? What kind of resources does he need? When we subtend all these arcs, something that conventionally markets have done, we are in an information age. Markets don't need to be the only way that we can know useful information. We can aggregate these with things like social networks and raw technology, and we can ameliorate the problems of getting these to work together using AI, because it isn't unlike transfer learning. Your ability to generally cope with some lateral problem is exactly what makes an AI better than a mechanical machine. And so it's a great place to prove the technology, and it's a great place to evoke hopefully a huge social upside.
Excellent. So along these lines, Brenda Ramakopawa made a comment about TAFFDs creating a platform that also aims to unearth hidden tech and futurist treasure in developing countries that global players can collaborate and interact with for mutual benefit. So I think AI could play a crucial role in discovering, one, the innovative adaptations that various people have made to their circumstances, and two, broadening the reach of those kinds of innovations to the general public and people in the rest of the world.
I'd like to add a technical note there. When I went to finished my graduate schooling in Switzerland and under Jürgen Schmidhuber, and he was intensely interested in curiosity. And I think that when you apply curiosity to looking analytically at a large group of people who are, say, depicting what it is that they do for a living, or what they're doing as projects, that the way in which we have dealt with what would you call serving up a search, on information is that we've tended to cluster it. But curiosity looks for the outliers, which is a different operation. And this is important because it will help people prioritize things like novelty. So when you have somebody who went against the grain and did it, you could think of Africa as a giant lab potentially, where the variation, the very nature of the variation that's creating is a source of innovation. And further, that it's imparting the persistent ability to innovate on the people who have to do it. We used to talk about American ingenuity, right? And this was when we produced a lot of our own stuff. We would, we never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we applied all these, sort of really good ideas to developing novel solutions to problems. I believe that Africa offers that opportunity right now. And that if we use the right types of technology to notice those details, where it is that people are doing things differently, this can have huge bounty for the whole world. We can essentially, be disseminating these things globally, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So now let's bring David Shoemaker and Art Ramon Garcia into the conversation. Any questions or comments that either of you have regarding what has been said thus far?
I'll start with saying that I think this idea of badging, the Better Business Bureau badge, is a brilliant idea. It's something that never occurred to me. And it's so easy to see how that can apply, not only for people that, maybe I'm thinking of this from my standpoint. In one of my businesses, I do some importing from other countries, and it's one of the challenges is always knowing who you can trust, not only from a supplier standpoint, but also transportation, getting the goods to where I need them to go, and being able to handle the banking transactions. This is brilliant. I'm also taking those thoughts and integrating them then with this blank slate that we talk about in Africa. That's something else that I hadn't thought of. And a blank slate is wonderful from the standpoint that it's a fresh start, which can be so hard to do here in the US with so many things so culturally entrenched. This whole conversation has made me really excited. I don't have any questions. I don't have any great insights, but I have great fascination now. So keep going.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David. And we shall keep going. Art Ramon, any thoughts or questions from you?
Yes, I've read this before, and it was in the context of where artificial intelligence has taken over the workplace, except it has gaps in its knowledge, and it has to go out and query human nodes with specific knowledge, and then that person would be paid for providing that knowledge. But yeah, it's where the artificial intelligence has gaps and it needs to reach out. And everyone in the future would be this worker node that could be queried by this AGI intelligence to fill in the gaps. And this would be the future of work, is that you are a little worker node in this big brain AGI, and you're just part of it where it cannot solve a specific problem. So it would be important to go ahead and identify everyone's skill set, and then that AGI would have perfect ability to go out and look for the information it needs. So, and I've read this before, I just don't know where or what terminology they used to describe it.
Well, Tom has spoken on this very subject. In fact, when he had his interview with Dr. Sharif Rana of the World Talent Economic Forum, he mentioned that one of the roles of human workers in the future will be to be problem finders rather than problem solvers, in the sense that artificial intelligence systems are going to have the resources to solve many problems, but they won't necessarily be aware of the particular problems in a given organization. And humans, especially humans who are observant, would have that talent. So, Tom, if you would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's the idea that I work with when I come and work with companies before they install an AI system. And that gets back to these uniquely human skill sets, and it's almost remembering our Jedi powers. Human beings are still each one of us is a massive computer that has a qualia that can sit back and just either knows, or through all of the data that it's brought in, can see where the holes are in a system. And so I believe that we need to start teaching our children, teaching students to problem find. AI will solve any problem, with its vast array of data and historical and all kinds of data. And I think I made the point on that show that shows like House MD was very popular here a few years ago. His type of doctor would be obsolete eventually. That you can just put all these symptoms and into an AI, and it will diagnose what is the issue with this problem. But there still may need to be a human who looks at the results of all that data and that diagnosis, and may have spidey sense, or may have some sort of Jedi awareness that something's off. And I think that is the kind of intuition, the kind of human skill set that we can really focus in on. You talk about things like psychics and clairvoyance and all of this, and there's a lot of charlatans in that field. But I think it's really just it's tapping into a qualia of a human experience that we just don't measure yet. And so the idea being that to teach our kids to be problem finders, because the solving part will be taken care of. And an AI will eventually, a general AI will be able to have curiosity enough to find these things itself. But even looking at things like AlphaGo, and the analysis of how it won that game, and it was using a kind of an intuition. It was using something that just didn't make sense and was hard to track, because you couldn't really find out how it was making that, because it would require making a copy of an infinite possibilities. Anyway, but the point being that that's one of the things that we need to really return to, is these sort of human skill sets that allow us to take in and analyze a whole system and find the holes, find the problems, and I think it's just a thing that we haven't measured yet, that we will be able to if we focus on it.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is quite a fascinating area of discussion.
And I just want to say, just to reiterate that point, the AI somewhat counterintuitively can increase the amount of human connection that you receive during care. Because in the U.S. here we have a big shortage of doctors, and I imagine it's even worse in Africa. But and AI could actually free them up. Right now, a lot of these things that doctors are doing, such as looking through CT scans and dealing with the medical records, which is a big mess. Electronic health records, unfortunately, have become extremely time-consuming to handle. But with better AI and technology, all that can be automated. So the doctor, essentially, instead of having to do all that, they have this sort of dashboard panel of AI tools, and they go through that, and then they have more time to spend with the patient to explain their situation, right, and provide that human touch. And so I guess it's a bit counterintuitive, but it really it can free up the doctors and also provide better care.
Very interesting point. And indeed, AI will enable humans to specialize in what humans do best, while leaving to AI the areas of absolute or comparative advantage that AI would have. And that should improve the focus on human-centric activities like caregiving. So great remarks there. And Edward, you and I were on the panel regarding the future of free markets with robots and automation and artificial intelligence. This was at Freedom Fest in 2017. And we both made the points that there are certain types of jobs that are more resilient with the advent of AI that can't just readily be automated away. So what are some of your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a very important point. By the way, there's a good book that came out, I think it was late last year, middle of last year, Robot Proof, Higher Education and Artificial Intelligence by Joseph Aoun. Anyway, it's a very interesting book. And one of the reasons is it talks about sort of the short and medium term, how to deal with the fact that, what is an incredible skill right now, and you really should learn it. 20 years from now, so an AI robot has taken it. And so what are some of the mechanisms we can develop? Right now we have in the United States unemployment insurance, where, the government takes a certain amount of your money, sticks it aside, and if you lose your job, they give you for a while. But decades back, people like me were working on ideas of allowing an account for retraining and lifelong learning. And now with artificial intelligence and robotics and all, suddenly people are saying, that's not such a bad idea of this. Who is it? Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers, talks about this as well, if you guys are familiar with that particular book, looking at China and the United States and then what's going to be the future of work. And it's something that I'm very interested in, and I've written about it, and I'll be writing a lot more about it. About what you do in the future. By the way, I want to dispel one myth that I hear a lot of times, that in the future, there's going to be no place for humans. And it's simply not true. There's always going to be something for human beings to do. There's always going to be choices about research or about resource use. For example, let's say we have the most prosperous futurist society you can imagine. We're still going to have questions of, okay, should we terraform Mars first, or should we build a Dyson sphere? And so we've got some conflicts about how you use resources and what resources we're going to use for that. And so I think we're always going to have these kinds of questions and issues. But to me, one of the 3 or 4 main things I'm going to be doing more of in the future is looking at the disconnect in the United States, especially between the schooling system and especially higher education versus the needs of the market for skills. To be developing artificial intelligence, biohacking. Most of you on this broadcast probably know that in April of 2018, I think this was in Paris, scientists were able to sequence the enzyme telomerase, which is the enzyme that can keep the telomeres on your chromosomes growing so that you don't physically age. Why wasn't that at national news? Why aren't there thousands of young people saying, our job in the future is we want to be, biologists or biotech folks, so we can take that fact that we've just sequenced this incredible enzyme and allow people to live, if not forever, at least long lives, to cure, incredible disease, terribly diseases. My mom is suffering from sort of mild dementia. I know where that's going, and it's tragic. And yet we haven't had for 2 decades, we haven't had any new things going on the market for dementia. Part of that's because of the Food and Drug Administration. And that's a whole different subject that Gennady knows I've written a ton of stuff about. But again, to me, this is going to be one of the important things. And again, Africans can learn from the mistakes we have and as it were, bake into the system ways that they can keep up with the technology so that they're not trapped in this little teeny thing. And then when we don't need Java anymore, oops, well, I'm unemployed, don't know what to do. So this is very exciting.
Yes, indeed it is. And hopefully we can inspire more young people to go into this kind of research. That is what my book, Death is Wrong, the illustrated children's book on indefinite life extension, was meant to do. And yes, Ed has a copy here. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for showing that. Perhaps.
By the way, there's another important aspect here. We've seen in the last couple of decades, for example, people from India and Pakistan, who, of course, were under the British Raj, and you can say there were bad parts of that. Okay, fine. The good parts is that they learned English. That was the language that unified the subcontinent, and they had some notion of the sort of Western way of the science and educational. And so now, when you look at this country, you see disproportionately people from that background and culture doing tech stuff. And so wouldn't it be great if the next group that we say, wow, it looks like everybody who is doing X are Africans. So I sort of look at what happened with people from the subcontinent and what they have done with their culture, and I think, well, guess what? We're on the ground floor to do that now in Africa.
Yes, absolutely. And with all of the comments that have been made about how many Africans are not tainted by the cynicism that many people in the Western world have toward technology, there's a real hope that African populations can contribute to the next generations of great technological breakthroughs. Indeed, the attitude that I am observing when I communicate with a lot of Africans is very similar to what existed in Europe during the 18th century Age of Enlightenment, when entire European societies were coming out of centuries of strife and religious dogmatism and authoritarian governments, and yet there was this renewed emphasis on reason and science and the application of the human mind to solve problems. And we've seen some strides made in Africa over the past 2 decades. Average life expectancy in the African continent exceeded 60 years for the first time in the mid-2010s. Now it's around 62 as of 2018. But that is remarkable progress compared to where it was in the year 2000. And likewise, with the example of Rwanda, Rwanda went from having a really horrific genocide in the mid-1990s to essentially having one of the cleanest, most technologically advanced, most prosperous cities in Africa today, which is Kigali. So there is significant progress, and I think it's due to the motivation that Africans have to embrace technology to try to get ahead, instead of imbibing a lot of this postmodern reactionary ideology against technology that seems to have permeated aspects of the Western world.
By the way, just a quick point to make here is that when you mentioned Rwanda, I mentioned the Index of Economic Freedom that looks at 47 sub-Saharan African countries, which account for about 1 billion people. And the sad news is that most of them are mostly unfree or repressed. Good news, there are 2 of them that are mostly free, and that's Mauritius and Rwanda. And so the progress there, I just want to underline that the data is not just a matter of you think it is. There's the proof right there, right here in the numbers.
Yes, indeed. And that speaks to the importance of paying attention to these freedom indicators. They could be leading indicators to essentially future technological and economic development in these countries. Now, some comments have already been made with regard to the role of AI in healthcare. For instance, Dan pointed out how this could lead to a refocusing of the efforts of human doctors toward tasks where they actually can yield more benefit to patients. And I know, Edward, you wanted to talk a bit about your thoughts in that realm as well.
Yeah, just to make a few comments. As I say, education, I think, is the most important thing. But in healthcare, this is another area where African country can perhaps leapfrog the Western countries, and that is to understand that with this exponential technology, you don't necessarily need many brick and mortar hospitals in the traditional way we have in the West. They're, by the way, tend to be very inefficient. They have duplicative, technology and all that. Well, there's one down the road has that too, and it's only being used 20% of the time, and they're very costly and so forth. So, you can get into the numbers here. The area where in the short term we have the most promise is diagnostics. And that's because, again, everyone who has a smartphone, which is pretty much everybody now, right? You can basically not just, Gennady and I can not just, see how fast we run and for how many minutes and how many calories we burn and all these cool tech stuff so that we can win one of these cool things, right? It's not just that. You have an ECG on I think it's the iPhone now. You're developing wearable diagnostics. The Aura Ring, for example, right now monitors sleep, but you have wearable diagnostics developing that you can put on like a vest, and it can do all the diagnostics. So instead of, like, my poor mom had to go into one of these body scan things, that she was in there for an hour. It was terrible. Just put on one of these things and it does it for you. Something I've written about and spoken about in years past is the lab on a chip, which is something that is very useful in Africa, where you take a little bit of blood or something, you put it on a chip that's a diagnostic chip that does a number of tests, and then if you're hooked up to Wi-Fi, it goes to a clinic or a hospital that diagnoses it. These are just a few items, and I could go down a whole lot more, but the point is, it can have a lot of cost savings. And I recommend everyone on this call has probably already read Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler's The Future is Faster Than You Think. If you haven't, you should go out and buy it immediately, or get the audio version and listen to it when you're jogging, like I do, whatever. But the point is, it goes into detail about these kinds of technologies that the Africans can use as they develop their healthcare systems into actual healthcare systems as opposed to sick care systems, and do it for much less cost than we do in this country. So again, that's just kind of the broad view, but I think that there's really an incredible opportunity here in countries that really need it, that they can do it cheaper, faster, so to speak.
Yes, indeed. And I do think it would be a great boon to not just Africans, but even people in the United States, to be able to have these readily available blood test results at will, essentially. Even today, someone in the United States has to go to a clinic to get their blood drawn, and sometimes pay hundreds of dollars or tens of dollars, depending on what their health insurance will cover. And that is an obstacle to getting up-to-date diagnostic information about vital statistics. Imagine if you could have your regular annual blood tests on a weekly basis, and then you would be able to keep ahead of any problematic trends. And certainly with African populations, that could help increase their life expectancies even further if they could take early interventions.
Right. By the way, just to cap this discussion, of course, the cost of sequencing a human-sized genome went from $100 million in 2001 to $10 million in 2007 to about $1,000 and going down today. With the sensors and technology, we could probably in the future, certainly in the United States, and again, we'll be the beta users, and then when it gets to Africa, maybe you can basically have a system where, because they know my genome personally, and they know all of my things, and I've got an Aura Ring on, a futuristic version and all, if I'm about to have a heart attack, the medics can be at my door even before I know that it's coming. Mm-hmm. That's literally what we're talking about, because it's individualized treatment. Aristotle, my favorite philosopher, wrote about how, medicine is about the individual. It's not about the group. We have general principles we can talk about, but it's you sitting there in front of me. That's what the doctor cures. So the technology today really is going to allow us to do that in the future. So it is very exciting.
Yes, that is quite promising. Now, there has been pointed out another dimension of this set of issues in the chat by Mike DeVerde, and he spoke about the necessity of surge capacity for pandemics. And of course, the US Transhumanist Party does support extensive and widespread hospital construction. I've spoken about this in the Future of Africa conference as well, where I pointed out there is an opportunity for African healthcare infrastructure to be greatly improved by the leveraging of rapid hospital construction techniques. I'm wondering, what could be the role of artificial intelligence in that mix and helping better respond to pandemics, triage patients, provide hospital designs that are capable of better separating the COVID-19 patients from all the other patients who need help but whom we don't want to get infected? What are some thoughts that could be germane to these kinds of considerations?
I have some things.
Certainly.
People who Edward pointed out that Aristotle said that you treat the individual. House taught me the opposite, that you can have things that emerge only from collectives. So for instance, if you have a bunch of people who are suffering suffering two sets of symptoms, but we view it as one set of symptoms, and the cleavage of those things into two separate things can make the difference between an effective and an ineffective treatment. So AI will be able to augment simple heuristic diagnosis by applying fault detection sort of technology. So like House would, where you would say, this treatment should be effective because this person appears to be suffering this one overarching malady, and they're not. They're really suffering two other maladies. Or for instance, in another example of the utility of AI in broadly distributed things like diagnostics on handheld devices, in the Western world we have a kind of pyramidal structure where there are a fair number of academic scientists in medicine who are looking to classify novel problems. And so with some frequency, we send people away to do this in Africa. Well, if we were able to do that with a distributed network of diagnostic machines, like distributed on handheld devices, we could conceivably, mitigate the sending people into harm's way, into war zones, places where there's serious threats, and AI, as in contrast to a simple heuristic diagnosis, will be able to realize that you're dealing with a novel threat vector. So even though it may perfectly share the exact same symptoms with some other pathology, it may be novel. And the biodiversity of Africa and complications related to infrastructural issues tend to cause these issues to proliferate. And so AI can be very powerful on that domain in where we're taking AI now. You can call whatever you'd like AI practically. So there's that.
By the way, Correy, I agree with you. I don't think there's any disagreement whatsoever. Part of what I see with diagnostics is exactly that. Is AIs. I mean, you want to talk about the IBM Watson, for example, right? And what it's been doing with the MRIs and so forth. This is exactly what we do. So we have all of this data, and as I say, if I'm hooked up to a database, I as an individual, it will know, well, Ed has this ailment and that ailment, but he doesn't have this other thing, and we know the correlation is 78% for this sort of thing, and da, 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 da. I see that all as part of what exponential technology can do. So I'm in complete agreement with you, and also on what it does for what you say about mitigating and putting people in harm's way. Remember, it was statistics in London. You probably know this better than I did. When they had one of the great plagues in the early 1900s, and they discovered it was one water pump that was spreading it. And how did they do that? That was the first use of famous use, I guess, of diagnostics, right? To discover, it's not, you still treat the individual. But if you know that this one water pump is what's spreading everything, then you shut that water pump down and bang, you don't have to treat the individuals because I'm not getting the disease to begin with, or the virus or whatever it is. So you're completely right on this.
I think the lowest hanging fruit is the AI diagnostic of chest X-ray, because that's well proven that it's at human level performance. Stanford has an AI system actually, which is publicly available, which is a human level or radiologist level performance on chest X-ray diagnosis. And you can actually take a picture of, if you have a portable chest X-ray machine, say out in which I understand are very common in Africa, whereas say CT or MRI is not as common. You can take a picture with your cell phone of the chest X-ray, and send it to Stanford. Actually has a website where you can upload it, and you can get a diagnosis for, I think, 10 or 11 different illnesses that Ed's talking about. Genetic testing, genetics, precision targeting of drugs. Drawing off the book Deep Medicine by Eric Topol. He believes that's going to be a huge cost savings and a huge kind of revolution. Scale genetic data coming online, that's going to be a reality. So that's probably those are two of the things I think which are probably the most promising right now. Then in the future, you could have also conversational AI, with the knowledge of a doctor, which could do sort of kind of real-time kind of advice. Imagine having the knowledge of a doctor in a conversational AI on your smartphone. That would be very powerful. So those are things I would be excited about. Of course, there's a lot more that's possible, but those I think are the kind of most practical, in the next few years.
Yes, this is quite interesting. Now, what do you think about potential uses of artificial intelligence to help identify the sources of spread for a pandemic like COVID-19? There was a mention before of, say, identifying a water pump that spread an infectious disease.
Well, there's one other thing I was going to say, which is that we may, one of the problems we have in the U.S. is that for tracing, say, spread, it's important that the data is available, right? And consolidated. And one of the problems we have in the US is that the data is, people's data is siloed into these electronic health record systems run by a few companies, but it's all locked up in the hospitals, and people don't have ready access to their data. So like if I go to a hospital and say, get a COVID diagnosis, that's all locked up in the system. And so maybe in Africa, we could, data could be more, people could have better access to their data and then make it available for researchers.
Yes, indeed.
There's actually some models about how, if you trade your data, obviously scrubbing your, personal identifications, that sort of thing, then you can get extra services because researchers want that data. So there's actually a market potentially for that data. But the siloization of the data is really a problem. Some of the work I've done on the FDA is very critical of the, or the need to open up those silos with the clinical trials.
Yes, and it seems one of the biggest promises of electronic health records had been that they would enable this kind of portability, but for whatever reason, because of the inefficiencies in design or control by certain entities, that has not happened yet. But if it does happen, it would be a boon for the ability to use AI to glean insights from aggregated data. And the data could be anonymized to respect the privacy of individuals, of course, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be made available for aggregate analysis. There is a practical set of questions from Zach Richardson that I would be interested in having the panel address. One of his questions is, what qualities would be measured to award the Taft's Better Business badge? And another question along these lines is that while he agrees about the badging initiative being desirable, he is wondering how that is going to help when the main obstructions to good business practices are governmental. So even if an entity has the badge, it might be prevented from doing the full range of activities that it would be capable of doing. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's going to be one of the keys, is giving opportunities to members inside even corrupt governments, but having the knowledge through Ed's work and through the AI of how to best find the avenues to make these things possible. So yeah, having that badge will be tailored to the specific country and the abilities that they will have to meet this criteria. But it will be very important for us to work with these governments as well, or with these educational institutions, and to understand all the various protocols and customs. And as we learn those things, we'll be able to fine-tune our model for similar countries, similar areas. But as far as the criteria to become TAFFDified, we're working through that right now. And in fact, just today, I've been working on slates that we'll put out on social media that identify certain words, and 7 key words that kind of encapsulate the type of personality that members in our team and partners should have. So I've only gone through a couple of these so far, and I'm working through them probably later today. So this week you'll see those coming out on social media. But they're all very general things at first. Ideas of one being to be conscious, to be aware of your surroundings, and to be conscious of the effects that your actions have directly on your environment and other sentient beings. And the next one would be things like passion. There has to be a certain a level of passion that people have for the species, for the continuation of our species, but also for the planet and a sustainable kind of future. So I'll put out some general criteria just to start mapping out the type of personality we're looking for, or the type of personality you should try to be in general. But we will get more specific about the criteria depending on what country we go into, because there will be obstacles to certain things. But that's all going to be part of this learning process in the next 6 months. But there will be just some general categories, criteria that members, partners, and our team will have to meet and continue and on an ongoing basis, and benchmarks to prove that these are still relevant characteristics.
Well, I look forward to seeing what criteria you develop. And it is a noteworthy observation that sometimes even in a corrupt government, there could be individual officials or branches of that government that may actually be seeking to improve the situation or to bypass the corruption somehow through a more honest mechanism. And perhaps the TAFFD's certification will help them to do that, or to discern the entities with whom they should work more closely.
That's what I mean.
By the way, if I can offer you another little optimism here, is because I've looked at social dynamics, and one thing is that you have the first generation coming out, and then a number of those folks are going to end up becoming teachers. They're going to become professionals. They're going to become maybe in media. They're going to become business people who are respected, and they're going to start changing the culture in the long run. So at first you've got the core group, but over a decade or two, then you're going to have a bigger cadre, so to speak, and that's going to change things. And again, Tom pointed out how things have gone 360 or 180 degrees around in Rwanda. If it can happen in Rwanda, for heaven's sakes, I'm sort of optimistic about what could happen in other countries.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for these remarks. We will definitely be on the lookout for future developments from TAFFDs, including on the development of this certification. And now I think we should bring this discussion to closing comments from all of the attendees. I will query the U.S. Transhumanist Party officers first, and then, as is our custom, we will have our guests provide the last word or words. So, David, what are your impressions regarding the conversation now that it is nearing a close?
I've been thinking a lot about this reputation badge. That's what I call it. We're certifying the reputation of a business, of an individual, things of that nature. And part of that criteria could be the ability to collaborate. So I'm looking back at the problem, say, with medical records. And if not only do people and organizations do that, but products also get this badge, perhaps, then the fact that if the medical records product that I put out has good cross-collaborative mechanisms to work with others and increase general benefit, then that's a good thing for the public. That's a good thing for my business. And if it's a good thing for my business, then it's going to be a good thing for me. So this can be something that having this reputation badge attached can not only draw, say, new investment and maybe new people to work with them, but can generally increase the whole idea. And I would love to see something like that here in my home state of Arizona. I'd love to see that among politicians that are running for office. I'd really like to generalize this. So what a great idea. Another great discussion today. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for showing up.
Yes, thank you, David, for those remarks. And in the chat, we see the Transdisciplinary Agora for future discussions posting that there is even a hashtag that would accompany this certification, a hashtag TAFFDsified. It would be interesting to see if that proliferates through various social media in 2021. So now we go to Art Ramon. What are your thoughts regarding this conversation?
I had a little trouble understanding exactly the goal of the group at the beginning, but now I have a much better understanding. So thank you for coming.
Indeed, I think this panel answered a lot of the questions that our audience had as well. So it was a very productive way to get new thinkers introduced to TAFFDs and its work, and also for those of us who have been more familiar with the organization to find out about its future directions. Now, TAFFDs is relatively recent. I believe it was formed in 2018 by Osinakachi Kalu, and Osinakachi has this impressive skill set of bringing together highly talented people and creating opportunities for interaction that would not have otherwise occurred, and doing that in a manner that spans continents and realms of human endeavor. I think he is definitely the motive force, sometimes behind the scenes, but his influence is very clearly discernible in everything that TAFFDs does. So I'm very pleased that he has found a way to connect with the transhumanist movement as well. So now let's go to Dan Elton. What are your concluding thoughts for this conversation?
Well, I don't have much more to add, but I think that we had a good discussion of AI. I actually completely support kind of optimism about AI, because I do think that the culture we live in here in the US is mostly techno-pessimistic. And so I think, the kind of discussions we're having here that are more optimistic in nature are really important. And I think I'm really excited to see what happens with TAFFD's. The web properties of the group are actually quite impressively built out. And I think with the new leadership here and the plan, it's going to take off. So yeah, very, very exciting stuff.
Yes, indeed. And the techno-optimistic aspect of this discourse is highly encouraging. I would echo that as well. Now, let's see if John Carrots is able to make any comments regarding this conversation.
Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to go back to where we talked about jobs and AI and humans. And I like the fact somebody brought up caregiving, but wanted to say that it gives people a chance for actually humans to be more humans. It could give them a chance to do the jobs that are truly human jobs. Although I think there's some resistance to people wanting to be retrained and to do different things. And I think sometimes some people do like doing the mundane jobs that are best used for automation. I think, though, this does give a great chance for humans to actually be more human and to specialize on what it is that makes us actually human and not being a cog in someone else's machine. So those were my thoughts.
Yes, indeed. And hopefully the initiatives that TAFFD puts forward not only to creatively apply artificial intelligence, but help people in African countries and elsewhere in the world discover their true talents that could be of broader relevance to humanity, will indeed bring out the more human attributes in a way that could be harnessed for wider human benefit. So thank you for those remarks, John. And now we have our guests, and I will leave it to the three of you as to who would like to go first with your concluding remarks with regard to this conversation, your impressions of it, or any further thoughts that you might have.
Correy, why don't you go first, and why don't we leave Tom, who's our leader, to go last?
That sounds good to me. So Correy, please proceed.
Oh yeah. So I'm grateful for Tom bringing me on as an officer with TAFFD, and I'm grateful that TAFFD existed to begin with to provide the opportunity. And I'm also grateful to Gennady and the support staff here today that allowed us to have this discussion. And I'd like to thank the people on the panel for contributing new thoughts about the topics that we're concerned with. And I am patiently realistic about my expectations, and I think that the tendency to to immediately push our qualia into discrete values is probably a mistake. I think that the things that we will have discovered we managed to do a year from now will far exceed some of our expectations at this point, and will fall far from some of our expectations that we put forward here today. And but the entire enterprise, because it's in the right direction, will be fruitful to all parties. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to try and bring an entire new continent of ideas into the fold of planetary thought. And I think that as long as we're all very careful not to repeat some of our, colonial behaviors, that we can bear fruit that we never knew that we had, or that we never knew that the world could produce.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Correy. And I do want to say, Ray Kurzweil made this point that sometimes people can overestimate what can be accomplished in the short term, but dramatically underestimate what can be accomplished in the long term. And as an organization develops, as it has some years to grow itself, sometimes it's remarkable what it can achieve. And even if short-term projections maybe fall short here and there, in the long term, the progress can be overwhelming. So I'm very hopeful for the future of TAFFDs. And before we go to Edward, James Connolly asks a question that perhaps both you, Edward, and Tom could address in your remarks, and that is how can, quote, normal folks help with the initiatives that have been discussed. So Edward, please proceed.
Okay, well, actually, Tom, that's a good question for us as an organization. How can normal people, meaning people who don't do this for a living, every day, contribute? And I will let you take that one. I will echo, of course, what Correy said. I want to thank Gennady and the Transhumanist Party for providing this forum, and I want to thank Tom for bringing me on, because, as I say, I've been interested in Africa for many decades, and now I get to do something that's not just high theory, but it's kind of let's help on the ground, and that's kind of where I'd like to be right now. Correy, your point about what we're going to know in the future. I always remember that Henry Ford had two companies that failed before he did Ford Motor. Steve Jobs got kicked out of his job, and then came back and succeeded. And Thomas Edison experimented with something like 6,000 filaments before he got the right one. He said, I didn't fail. I succeeded in discovering this one didn't work. So, and F.A. Hayek, one of my heroes, of course, talked about the importance of how knowledge develops through experimentation in organizations as well. And a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, right here, just wrote a book on business, analyzing and looking at which businesses sort of looked in the long term, experimented, always kept knowledge coming into the company, and in the long term succeeded. Amazon would often not make its earnings, projections, but the investors kept with Amazon because they were looking at the long term. And we know what happened with Amazon. It's pretty much succeeded very, very well. But I think we're going to see a lot of benefits in the short term as well, just because of the excitement I've seen in, among our African friends and colleagues. And so they're looking for opportunities, and we're helping to provide that. And so I want to thank all of you who've been involved. By the way, you can always contact me through Facebook and through other ways. I'm out there on LinkedIn and so forth. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom and thank Tom for bringing us on board.
Thanks,
All right.
Ed.
Tom, please proceed.
Yeah, in closing, I think picking up on what Ed just said about experimentation, creates knowledge, and these interviews, these opportunities you've given us help us figure out what it is we're doing. It helps us fine tune the story and the narrative that we're working on, and the questions that come in are as important as the strategies we're coming up with, because they tell us where the need is. And so although we're just starting out here and we're kind of just getting our feet wet early on, coming on and talking about it is so important to this process. And I want to bring up another thing in that, a month ago I started this, and we've been strategizing and meeting and talking and communicating and figuring out, the mechanisms of this thing. And a couple weeks ago, Ed participated in a Tacadia session where he taught some African citizens a segment that was very useful, and he had great feedback on his information. But the one thing that I didn't expect that Oak reported back to me was that these African citizens who participated in that were not just excited about the information that Ed imparted, they were hopeful because suddenly people were taking them seriously. And I forgot about that part of things, that what we're doing is not just, trying to create some NGO that will help technologists and futurists. This is giving very capable, very tech-savvy young population a sense of hope. There's an attention on them that they will rise to. And that's the X factor I didn't really expect. And it just gave me so much more drive to make this thing happen. And so to James's question about, what can normal people do, as if there's anybody normal anymore, especially James, that what you can do right now is sign on. We're going to be taking on members right now, and then later we'll parse them out and and collate them in different ways. But right now we just want people in. We want names. We want ideas to build up the directory. But more so than that, just pay attention to the youth in Africa. Reach out to different groups and the people that are a lot of African citizens that are on my page and just through TAFFD, just pay attention. This is really where the potential is for humanity. I love the fact that, the origin of humanity is now its future, and that's real because it's 19-year-old median age, the youngest population on Earth that are techno-optimistic, they're tech-savvy, they're hungry, they're eager, they don't have the cynicism that we all have about it. And there's just so much potential there and equal amounts of challenges too. So, and that's what excites me, is the potential and the challenge. And I think more than anything, what normal people do, especially here in America or in the West or developed countries, is to pay attention to Africa. That's really where we'll find a lot of hope for us and give a lot of hope for them that will inspire them to do what we need them to do. And that's really just fix the future.
Yes, indeed. Fix the future. That is a great exhortation to conclude our virtual Enlightenment Salon with. As always, we have had an in-depth, wide-ranging, highly thought-provoking conversation, and I would like to thank all of the attendees for this experience. This is what we aim to achieve at our weekly virtual Enlightenment Salons. So please join us again next Sunday as we continue these intellectual explorations. And in the meantime, live long and prosper.